This is Damian Macy, representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library, and I'm working on the Oral History Project. It is Wednesday, June the 17th of 2015, and I'm at the lovely home of Ken and Nancy Claypool on North 7th Street, 606. And I know Nancy did not grow up in Marshall, but she's got an interesting background and was a great influence in Marshall. But I'm going to ask her just to start with her childhood, telling about where she was born, her family, education, and really what brought her to Marshall. And with that, here's Nancy Claypool.
All right. I was born and raised in Findlay, Ohio, and of course lived there with my parents and two sisters. Went to all of my school years there and then went on to college. I was the youngest of the three siblings in our family, and I went on to go to college at Bowling Green State University, which was just up I-70 from Findlay in Bowling Green, Ohio. I studied there for 4 years and earned a bachelor's degree in business. With my specialization was marketing. And during the summer between my junior and senior years of college, I did a business internship at Marathon Oil Company in Findlay, which that's the main headquarters, the world headquarters of Marathon Oil Company. And I happened to meet my future husband, Ken Claypool, there. He was working there, or he was originally from Marshall, but he was working in the Findlay office at that time, and we met, and I went back to college in the fall, and we kept dating, and we eventually got married then the next summer in July. So, of course, we moved out here. So I went direct.
What year was that you got married?
1981.
1981,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, came out here, and I actually worked for Richard Eubank in the insurance office for a short while. And I also worked at what was then called Laco Manufacturing, now Yargus Manufacturing, for a short while. And then I had our first son, Tyler, and I didn't go back to work for, I believe, 12 years. I stayed home and raised our son, Tyler, and then our twins, Ryan and Ethan. I was a stay-at-home mother for about 12 years and enjoyed that greatly. Ken and I both felt very blessed that we were able to afford for me to stay home with the children and not work. Although I do contend that being a stay-at-home mother is the hardest job of all. When the boys went to school, I started doing some substitute teaching in the elementary schools and the other schools as well. Some substitute secretarial work at the schools. And eventually I went on to be an aide in the library at the junior high, just a couple days a week. And then after doing that for a couple of years, a couple of members of the Board of Trustees of the Marshall Public Library approached me about being their first director because they had expanded and they felt like they needed a director at the library in addition to their head librarian. And it was completely new territory for me and for them. It was a new position, and I thought it sounded like a wonderful challenge, and I was ready to get back into the workforce more seriously, more than just part-time substituting, And so I became the director of Marshall Public Library in 1998.
Did your work in the school library kind of prompt you to have some interest in going that direction?
It did. I enjoyed very much being involved in the library at the junior high. It was exciting to see kids get interested in literature and information. And that was when they were just starting to use computers at that level in the schools, and the kids were just so excited about it. And it just seemed like a really exciting field. And honestly, before I was approached about working at the library, it never would have occurred to me to apply to the library at
Really?
The public library. I probably would have pursued teaching, gone back and gotten more education so that I could have gone into teaching, if I would, or gone back into the business world, one or the other. It just really never occurred to me, and I think that is kind of a common theme, that a lot of people just don't think of the library as a career. But I am so grateful that they thought of me and that they were willing to take a chance on me being the first director at the library. And I think that because they had seen my interest in the library, and I also knew Janet Haston, the library, who was on the library board at the time, prior to that, and had been involved with her in a couple of things prior to that, that's what, prompted her to ask me to apply.
As I recall, Nancy, there had never been a director before, so this was, you said, new territory. But did you end up writing maybe your own job description, or did they have some guidelines for you to follow? Or how did you actually get started in putting that office in that position together?
They had written up a very simple job description. And honestly, it was there was so much more to it, of course, than really that job description entailed. And the things that were in the job description were my responsibilities, but I had to figure out how to do all of those, because a lot of those things weren't even being done yet at all at the library. And so really, I didn't write my own job description, but I formed the job, really. I made all of the procedures for getting to those job description items finished.
Since it was so new and really a completely unexplored territory, did you ever feel like, gosh, what on earth am I doing here?
I did. Some of the things, Leanna Morris was the head librarian at the time, and quite a few of the things she had been doing, in addition to trying to be the head librarian, be in charge of all the staff, and she was running the show completely by herself for a long time when it had expanded. And actually, the size of the library's service area had more than doubled. Actually, not the size, but the size of the population that we served more than doubled, and the size of the physical library building tripled. All at about the same time, at about between 1995 and 1997. And so there was an explosion of things that had to be done, and it just was not possible for one person to do that, and that's why they felt like they needed me. So I was able to get some guidelines from her, like how to write this particular state grant, how to turn the invoices into the city, and a few things like that I took over from her. But then I expanded on just pretty much about everything.
The expansion of the library, when you first joined the library and became the director, was it in just the one small west building? Or had they actually moved into well, it used to be the Kroger building? And
The library had already expanded.
I wasn't sure
They had
that-
already renovated, which was always very grateful that the renovation was completely done when I got there, except for a couple of years after I was there, maybe 4 years. I think it was 2002. We did the back rooms. We renovated the office area and the storage area so that we could add the activity room.
Okay.
We needed a place that had didn't have carpet, and sort of like was a workroom for the staff and a room for programs, children's programs and meetings and things like that, and also better office area. Leanna and I were just sharing a small office space, and really we each needed a separate office and better. So that's what we did. I had written a grant for that. So after that, we just did some small remodeling, not so much remodeling, but more rearranging and improvement on furnishings and things like that after that point.
When you were looking at, say, improvements, and I know the casework and all down there is really, really beautiful, did you kind of visit some other libraries to determine, well, here's what someone else is doing, but here's someone else, well, here's the better one of the two?
We did. In fact, the library board, each year in August, I took the library board on a tour of another library. We went to, I think we've been to every library within 30 or 40 minutes in the last, 15 years probably. And some of them more than once if they happen to have taken on a larger project or renovated or something like that, or some new thing had happened. But we invited both library boards to those tours and some staff in the last few years, and it was really a good thing because we looked at services that we maybe hadn't thought of. We saw interesting ways to display things. We saw interesting things about how they house different parts of their, like different rooms, all sorts of different things. It was so interesting. We really learned a lot, and we always came home with ideas. Sometimes we came home and said, we're doing pretty well. We like what we have better, but not in every single case. So,
Nancy, you mentioned both library boards. Would you kind of elaborate on that? Because most people think of a library board that there's one of them.
Right. In 1995, a group of citizens decided that they lived just outside the city of Marshall, and so we're not in a library district. So in order to use Marshall Public Library, they had to buy a library card, purchase the ability to use the library. And so they undertook what was called a library demonstration grant with the state library. And they went to the voters and asked to form a library district. And it's now nicknamed the Donut District because it is a donut shape around the city of Marshall, and it encompasses primarily the remainder of the school district, except for a couple of townships and a couple of small pieces of a couple of other townships. It does not include York or Melrose and a few other just small portions of, I'm not sure, maybe Anderson and a couple of other townships. But primarily it's the school district, the rest of the school district. And it is called Marshall Area Public Library District. It's very confusing, and because this is a somewhat unique situation, even in the whole state of Illinois, there may only be maybe one other instance where one library building serves more than one library district. It's a contractual arrangement where Marshall Area Public Library District turns over 90% of their tax revenues off the top immediately to Marshall Public Library for the use of their library facilities for their residents. Now, Marshall Area Public Library District is much, much larger in physical area than the city of Marshall, but the population is almost equal. The city of Marshall and the area district, the population are each almost exactly the same, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,900 to 4,000.
So the Marshall Library Board is appointed
Correct.
by the city.
Right.
What is the establishment of that donut board?
It's completely different. They are elected because they are their own taxing district, whereas the trustees of Marshall Public Library are sort of like a committee or a department of the city government. So they are Marshall Area Public Library districts there are 7 elected trustees, and Marshall Public Library has 9 appointed trustees. Their fiscal years are different, and there's a lot of things that are different. The area district doesn't have a library building, they don't have staff, they don't have books or any other kind of materials. They just have a contractual agreement with Marshall Public Library to provide those things for their residents.
Do the boards, shall I say, work together, or are they really very independent and just communicate with each other?
They are completely independent. They do communicate, and that's one of the responsibilities, that's a large responsibility of the library director, is to make sure that they communicate and understand one another, and make sure that the area district knows that they do have a voice. They don't have any responsibility for what goes on at Marshall Public Library, but their concerns and their interests are very much taken into consideration. Every spring in March, February or March, used to be March, the 2 library boards get together at a meeting, a sort of a retreat on a Saturday morning. We call it the planning breakfast, and they get together and they talk about goals for the coming year, maybe some strategies, some challenges that happened in the last year or so, and just sort of have a meeting of the minds so that everybody understands where everybody else is, and that the library staff is also on the same page. So it's a good thing to do. And then they tour the libraries together in August, and they get together at the holidays too.
I guess having worked with people for so many years, sometimes there's going to be conflicts. Or maybe I should say disagreements. Has that ever happened and been an issue?
Never. We have been so fortunate to have so many lovely people and trustees who truly, truly care about what's going on at the library. Now, there has been a time or two when we have had a trustee who maybe found out that they really weren't as interested in being a trustee as they thought they might be, and they just don't stay on very long. But in my years as the library director, almost 17 years, I never had a conflict. Never had a conflict. The only times voices were ever raised would be if someone just sort of got a bee in their bonnet and was adamant about something, but it wasn't because it was a conflict with another board member. It was just something they were kind of enraged about or something.
I find that amazing because in that many people, in that many years, to get everyone on agreement on the same board. But I think, Nancy, that comes as an attribute of your direction and your ability to keep people calm, to keep them together and keep working together.
Well, thank
because
you.
It doesn't usually happen.
Well, but I will say that's has been one of the best things about working at the library is that it's a positive place. It's just about doing good for people. And while there are some challenges, it's been a very smooth thing, especially especially with the trustees. They've just been wonderful people to work with.
If you were to say you had a choice in making some changes to the structure, would you have any on the structure of people and all that you would recommend?
I wouldn't.
Okay.
I think right now we have a wonderful, wonderful group of staff, especially. The new director who took my place, I'm so excited that she is going to do a good job, and she's young and she's got the energy. She's just come back from a 5-day conference in Springfield and has a lot of ideas. And our head librarian is there are just no limits to what she can do. It's between the head librarian and Jamie Porman, the head librarian, and Allison Thompson, the director. I just think there are no limits to what they can do. I would not change a thing.
You mentioned grants, and I know it seemed like so many grants have dried up in the last few years, economic problems and all. How did you learn about the grants and what was available and what to strike out for?
Well, thanks to the internet, it was easy to see what the state had to offer. And plus, the state library was always very good about notifying us this grant is available and be on the lookout and start thinking about this grant. And they're always very good about keeping people in the loop about those things. But if you want to go outside of the state library or the state of Illinois, that's when it gets hard to find grants. And some of it is luck. I will say some of it is luck and good fortune and being around good people. Just for instance, Walmart gives community grants, and it seems like every year it changes a little bit. And if you look at their website, it makes you think that the library is not eligible for anything. Mm-hmm. But the management will call us and say, hey, you better apply for a grant. We really want to give you a grant this year. And they would help walk us through and make sure that we did get in there. And so you've got people not related to the library who are rooting for you, that help you with things like that. And a few years ago, one of our patrons, Don Gwinnett, alerted me to the fact that there was I'm sorry, I have to think about this. Department of Agriculture, I can't remember what the grant was. Rural Development grant through I think it was the Department of Agriculture. And that wouldn't have been anything I would have sought out in a million years, but that grant was available. It was very, very difficult to apply for, but the department walked me through it. They were so helpful, and actually we didn't get it the first year and we had to reapply, but we got it the second time through, and it was a $55,000 grant, and we did a lot with that. We improved all of the technology in the meeting room, the speakers and the internet and the wireless and the projector, so that we could do a better job giving programs. We upgraded the flooring in the teen area, which ended up being a nightmare story, which I won't go into. It was much, much more difficult than it ever should have been, but it turned out beautiful. We ended up with new shelving in the front of the library for our magazine section, so that we could store the back issues underneath a folding shelf. And then the top showed the current magazine. That was wonderful. And I believe there might have been something else with that too. But it was just a very, very great grant that we received. And had I not been tipped off to that, it never would have happened. And as a matter of fact, that even required some politicking, you might say, some handshaking and things like that, and some contacting some people on the state level to kind of get our name in the hat as well. So, which would not have been within my realm. I would not have had those contacts. So this person really, really helped us out. And that was so wonderful.
Had you had any, I guess, experience or training in grant writing?
Absolutely not. You know, it's really just completing forms, which is not a hard thing to do, but it's when you come to the writing. And I'll tell you, writing is just something that you sort of learn to do with experience. And at the end of my career, I was a much better writer than I was at the beginning of my career. It's just something that you hone over the years, but it just takes good writing, really. And let's see, how do I want to say it? You just want to be very, very convincing in your writing.
I've written a few, but not one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah.
The use of the grants, and obviously you've been able to accomplish several things, and with the improvements of the library, so many people think, I guess, of a library as being books, magazines, books. But our library has a lot more than that in it. And I think maybe some of these grants, you mentioned technology.
Oh, yes.
Would you elaborate on that one a little bit?
Well, the library is just so much more than books now. In fact, books, I would never, ever want to step foot in a library that didn't have books. Yeah. But I do have to admit that technology has changed libraries completely. And as I said, when I first started my library career, it was just sort of starting to blossom. And it is just now changing at such a fast pace that it is so difficult for libraries, and I'm sure many other facets of the business world and other education it's the same way, but it's changing at such a fast pace that it's difficult to keep up, not only with hardware and software, but with training not only the users but also the staff to deal with all of the changes and the new equipment and software and so forth. So it's very, very challenging, but it's very exciting too. But you have to temper that with what will the community use and what will the community benefit from, and how much money can you spend on something. You have to make sure that if you're going to spend money on some new technology, it's something that will be highly used. There's so many things out there that cannot be afforded at this point and wouldn't be used either. And one example of that would possibly be downloadable magazines. And that's just one small example that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing, but it's very costly, and probably not very many people would take advantage of that. So it's really a balancing act. And it's interesting because probably in maybe the year 2000, around 2000, now that would be 15 years ago, we received a very small grant for a few ebooks 15 years ago. And it was called, it was a software application on our website, and it was called Net Library eBooks. And at the time, I was doing, as I always did, I was going from organization to organization and talking about what was going on at the library. And I would talk about ebooks and trying to explain it to people, and I could tell that nobody had a clue and nobody was interested in it. I mean, it was just a very, very small portion of the population who that even showed up on their radar yet. Everybody knows what an ebook is now, nearly.
Really?
At least they know what it is. Yeah. Not everybody uses them, not everybody's interested in them, but it's a common word, and 15 years ago, that was a waste of money. Now, we received a grant for it, so we paid almost nothing for it at the time, but that service did not get used to its potential whatsoever. And it was a waste of my time, almost, it seemed like, to talk about it. So you just have to really very carefully parcel out this technology and do it at the pace that the people around you are ready for.
So what you're saying, it's a little bit of kind of a spoon feeding them. And gradually, when I go into the library, I see every computer almost every time I go in there. There are people at it, and many of them seem like some very older people and very young. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of the typical users? I'm sure
yes.
It varies from time to time.
It does vary, but and it's almost even surprising that people still come to the library to use computers because they are so highly available to everyone. I think what they're really coming for is the internet access. That's what they come for more than just the computer use.
And the price of them have gone down too.
Price of computers have gone down, so you could pay a couple of $100s and have a computer at your house, but it's the internet access that is hard for people to afford. So many people come in with their wireless devices. Almost, I can't say what the percentage is, but the percentage is getting higher of people who bring their own devices in so that they can download and sit in the library and use, or just come to the library and download and then go use it at home, such as library books and things like that. So
I see there's other things, the magazine, a wonderful selection of magazines. There's a puzzle over there. There's nice pictures and things around. And also some wonderful programs. What got you really started on making these programs available to the community?
that's a good question. I think when I started at the library, the only programs we had was our summer reading program for children. And I think there had recently been some tax assistance. I think Gerald Eagland had done
right.
some tax assistance in the past, and really not much else. Primarily because the librarian didn't have time. She was trying to do so much. She was trying to do everything and didn't have the time. And this is the case with a lot of other small libraries who just have one person who wears all the hats. They have a lot of trouble having programs. When they hired me, they had a person who had a little bit of time to do that. And it was exciting, and it was so fun to search out and decide what would people like to have, what can we offer with almost zero price tag. That was the key. And we worked it out, and that's pretty much what we did year after year after year, was provide programs with hardly any cost whatsoever. There are so many people in the community who wanted to offer to tell about things that they had some expertise in, were highly interested in, such as a neighbor of mine who does a lot of traveling and would be willing to come and tell about his travels, Mr. Damien Macy, who is my interviewer. And so many people were so generous to do things like that that we were able to have a couple of adult programs every month and some children's programs off and on. We got the schools involved. It was one of our goals to get as many school children in the building as we could every year, so that they would be exposed, and then they would get excited about reading and using the library, because that's a lifelong habit that we really wanted to instill. Things that you start children in it as a youth, a lot of times they may not stay with it, but they may come back to it later on and be readers or library users. So we want to do that. Our strategy with that was to invite the first, third, and fifth grades at separate times to come every single year, so that every child could come every other year to the library and get to do something fun at the library, an educational and a fun program of sorts that would get them excited about coming to the library and using the library.
Was that planning and work done through the school administrative office or the individual teachers, or?
I just worked with, well, it kind of differed, but usually with the administrator, with the principal, school principal, I would arrange it. But we did a lot. We had a lot of really fun programs over the years. It was great. And the school was very supportive. In fact, they bused the children for free to the library. Okay. Sometimes they walked, but almost always the school bused the children to and from the school, the public library, for free to make that happen. And that was great. We footed the bill. In fact, the Friends of the Library footed the bills for those programs. Those did have a price tag on them. So,
do you know when the Friends of the Library started, or what developed it?
I cannot remember what year they started, but it may have been No, I don't think I can say when they started.
I
It's
don't know.
been some years, and I know it was before I was there. It had already been developed before I came in '98, and I think it was several years before that. It was a somewhat weak group for a few years. We were trying to meet monthly, and they were having a little trouble with their leadership. And eventually I just decided that in the years that we couldn't get a president, that I would be the president.
Oh.
And so I was president for several years there in a row. And then we got some pretty strong leadership. We made it every other month. And we got some pretty strong leadership and eventually a president and so forth. And so it's a much stronger group now. And it's amazing the amount of money that they end up making every year without doing any fundraisers. They really do. They support a lot of the things, the extras that we're able to do at the library, which is great.
You mentioned technology. Well, on it just a little bit. But one thing that I am aware of are old newspapers, which is a lot of history of the community. And of course, paper will fall apart if it's used very much. Mm-hmm. And you've had a plan to make those available.
Right. So what has happened is the Friends of the Library have agreed to start a program that we're calling our newspaper digitization program. And they are funding the digitization of all of our microfilm of our local newspapers. The library holds local newspapers back to about the 1860s. And a few sort of wide area newspapers in those distant years as well. But they are digitizing all those reels of microfilm since the Civil War years, and so that they're now, not only are they digitized so that they're on a CD or a DVD that can be accessed on a computer, but they are online now. Jamie Poorman, our head librarian, has put them on a genealogy page on our website. And so now they're available and they are searchable, actually, and people from all over the world can access them and are accessing them.
That was what I was just getting ready to ask you. Do you have any record, or are you able to tell how much this is being used?
Yes. I can't give those figures, but they can.
The resource is there.
They can track that. It's interesting. It's very interesting. And another thing the Friends of the Library are doing, which Mr. Macy here is also highly involved in, is what we're doing right now, our oral history project. And Damien and another individual, Mr. Maury Miller, are doing a lot of interviews of individuals in our community, most of them older, asking them just about what they remember about Marshall and growing up here and what their careers have been and so forth. And how many? 30, I believe those two individuals have done
over 40 now.
Over 40 interviews, in addition to the ones that we already had, which was a good number, maybe that many as well. And those are also being transcribed and digitized and put online. And we actually have a YouTube channel with those on the internet so that you can download those and listen to them. So it's incredible, really, what can be done now.
But you've seen a lot of that changes in rather a short period of time.
Yes.
And really, you've been instrumental in
Right.
making a lot of that happen.
Right. I just kind of have been the herder because I haven't myself done those things, but the people around me have done them with my encouragement, I guess I would say. So there's just so many people with so much ability and so much willingness to do good things for the community, and a lot of it funnels through the library, and it's just so gratifying.
Well, the programs that you mentioned are just absolutely outstanding. And the attendance of those are just amazing.
They
too.
are.
And a lot of times people from outside the community.
People really enjoy them, and they are well attended. Really, the library is somewhat of a community center. I kind of consider it the heart of the heart of the community. Really, Marshall has a lot to offer.
You mentioned the the plans and all, and I've been to some of the city council meetings when you've given the presentation for your budget and budget requests. Have you, over the years, apparently had very good response and support of the city council then to help with funding and to make some of your plans and your goals happen?
They have. The city has been so very, very supportive. Quite a few years ago, and I can't tell you which year we started doing this, a city councilman approached me and asked me if I wouldn't like to put together a library improvement plan. And that's how it started, that the city started giving the library a little extra every year. And it's wonderful because here we are, a tax-based service in a small community where in many communities they struggle with what they have. We get tax revenues from the city of Marshall because we are a library district, a library, that we are funded by a tax for that. Specifically, we get the money from Marshall Area Public Library District, and we have proven to the city of Marshall that we have been really good stewards of those tax revenues, and we have spent it wisely and served the community well, and they have turned around and given their support as well and given us some extra funding every year. And it has made a huge difference, a huge difference. The difference between a good or excellent library and a struggling or average library.
We've had people, friends visit. There's 2 or 3 comments they always mention is about how clean the city is, how progressive it looks, but what a marvelous library you have. And I think that's something we can be proud of, and it's certainly been director like you that's helped make that possible, because we've only had one.
Well, thank you.
When you first came to Marshall, and you've been here a few years now, do you remember what Marshall looked like then, and how do you compare it today with the way you saw it when you first came to this town?
Oh my goodness. Well, when I first came to town, I was a little bit in culture shock because I was from not a huge city, but a city of, I'd say, 40,000. Mm-hmm. And of course, I was pretty young as well. But I was surprised at how small the town was, but I was fine with it. Really, I was happy to be here. One thing that sticks out in my mind is going to the band concerts. That was just really special. Thought that was really great, and it is the same today. It's just a delightful thing about Marshall. But I also remember my wonderful mother-in-law, Virginia Claypool, taking me going downtown with her for something and walking across the middle of the street
And not getting run over.
and not getting run over and not even thinking twice about it, which is something you cannot do in a larger city. And that was a surprise to me. That was kind of a wake-up call. Oh, and also not having to lock your car door every time you got out of it. We didn't do that really back then. And I don't know.
Those are interesting comments, and I think someone coming from a larger city kind of would be expected. Has there been a person or an individual in your lifetime that has really been a major influence or made you choose a career or something?
I always wanted to be a homemaker. And my mother was a homemaker, was a stay-at-home homemaker. And my mother-in-law was a wonderful, wonderful influence in that area because she was, well, a wonderful person and a very, just a kind lady. But she was a former home ec teacher for many, many years, and she had been a kindergarten teacher. She was a wonderful seamstress and a fabulous cook, as you can imagine. Well known in the community as good at all of those things. And she taught me many, many things about being a good person and being generous and kind and thoughtful. I think she might have been one of the biggest influences on me, maybe outside of my husband.
And she was a wonderful neighbor.
That's right. I'm sure she was.
We've all got modern things around our house and in the garage and basement and everything. Is there some mechanical or an invention that you say, my goodness, it's just something I couldn't live without?
Well, when the microwave is broken, I think that is probably what I would say. And you know, I don't love my microwave, but I think we use it a lot. That has happened a couple of times to us, and it's like, oh, what can we do without our microwave? And I think the last person of everyone I know to get a microwave because I was intimidated by it. But the thing that made me do it was when our twins were born and I needed to be able to have a bottle warmed up now, whenever the time called for it.
And I was laughing when you said that because I usually ask that question to most people, and I think the microwave has to be at the top of the list.
Really?
So many people
How about
have mentioned that. Nancy, you mentioned a couple things about your children. You might just address where they are now.
Oh, well, our oldest son, Tyler, who is 32, or will be 32 this summer, lives here in Marshall with his wife, Tara, and their two children, Colby and Sadie, who are very small now. They're 3 and 8 months, not quite 3 and 8 months. And Tyler works in Terre Haute in project management. He's in construction management. And his wife, Tara, is a pharmacist in Robinson. And we're so happy they're in the area. Then our twins, Ryan and Ethan, are 30 years old. And Ethan lives here in Marshall with his wife, Aubrey. And their 2 young children, Carson, who's 5, and Milo, who is 1. And they live on the Fox Road. Ethan works for Marathon, and actually in Robinson, but for the pipeline company. and his wife is a stay-at-home mother. His twin brother, Ryan, lives in Portland, Oregon now, and he is in television, which is quite different than the other two boys. He will be married in August to his fiancée, Abby. They're getting married in Idaho in August. Ryan travels a great deal with his career in television. He is a cameraman. He does camera work for mostly reality television shows, and loves it. Does a lot, primarily outdoor, almost exclusively outdoor in Alaska, and really enjoys it. He's looking for something that will keep him home a bit more, but he really enjoys it for now. So.
Well, Nancy, you've given us a lot of interesting things, and especially your experiences in the library. If you were visiting another country and you were trying to tell someone about Marshall, why it's a good place to live, or why they might want to visit here, what would you tell them about our town?
Marshall is just so friendly and comfortable and kind, and it's just a lovely place to spend your time. We've been many places, and we are always so happy to get back to Marshall. We just consider it the best place on the planet.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a delight visiting with you. And as you know, this will be on file. It will be in print at the library for people to see, and also internet is going to make it available. So I think there'll probably be a lot of people, and not just today, but in the future, are going to say, I didn't know that about Nancy. I didn't know that about the library. So you're going to be able to fill in some history for the future.
Very good.
And with that, we really appreciate your time and your hospitality.
Thank you, Damien.